Hey guys, welcome back to the Quick Shift channel. My name is Jason and today we're going to work on the Rubicon. We're going to install the Mopar 2-inch lift on this vehicle today, and we're going to see just how much lift we get out of this kit and how difficult it is to install. It does come with directions, and the directions are just pictures, so we'll see if we have any run-ins with that, and we'll get to it. All right, before we get started here, guys, let's take a center measurement of the stock height on this Rubicon. And it looks like it's just about at 39 inches tall. So again, another stock height measurement in the rear. And it looks like we're at about 39.5 inches tall in the rear. Now that we have that stock measurement on the stock configuration, I'm gonna go ahead and get this thing up on jack stands so we can start working on the front. All right, guys, so now we have it up in the air. We've laid out the kit for front and back for this suspension kit. We're gonna go ahead and start loosening up the bolts and following the directions and see where we get. All right, guys, so we've loosened the traction bar bolts, and now we're dropping the shields on the upper control arms. Say hi to Austin. He's here helping us again. All right, guys, so at this point we've broken free or loose the upper control arm bolts, and now we're breaking loose the lower control arm bolts. All right, so we have the upper and lower control arms loose, and now we're removing the sway bar end links with an 18 millimeter. Sway bar end links are off, and now we're dropping off the shocks. Now that we have the shocks out, we're going to go ahead and loosen the bracket here and the upper bracket right there. All right, guys, so we have to drop out this brake line bracket here as well to give some free play to the unit. So next up, you have to pull this sensor off. And I don't know if you guys can see that, but there's a little tab on the top. You press that down and then it pulls right out. Coming in on the passenger side, you have to do the same thing over here. There we go. We've lowered down the front differential, and now we're going to go ahead and pull the spring out and put the new springs in. All right, now that we have the spring out of the way, we're going to go ahead and take the bolts out of the lower control arms and then pull these out. We got the passenger side lower control arm out, and you can see when you line these up, there's just barely a difference in length. So now we're going to drop the driver's side lower control arm. When you're putting in these lower control arms, you can very much expect some finagling to get those bolts to line back up. You'll have to twist the front differential forward, backwards, left and right a little bit, wiggling it to get those to line up and get the bolts back through. It takes a little bit of patience and a friend, thank you Austin, to make this happen. Now that we got the lower control arms on, start fastening the brackets back on that we had previously taken off. Here's the stock Rubicon spring, and here's the Mopar 2-inch lift. So it should make a bit of a difference as we get these installed. All right, so when you put the springs in, you want to make sure on the top for the isolator, you get these two nipples up here on both sides in the right spot. And then on the bottom, you want to make sure this is keyed properly and that the spring is sitting in that gap. So next up, we're going to put in the bump stop extensions. They go inside and you'll bolt them in from underneath. A little bit of advice when you're putting in these bump stops, get yourself some channel locks here, and you can hold this in place while you tighten the bolt on the bottom. That'll make life a lot easier. It's really difficult to get in here. You can't hold it by hand and it'll spin on you. So there's my tip. All right, so we've got the driver's side shock in here. You got to remember to torque these down. 80 foot-pounds up top, 75 down below. Remember, if I ever invite you over to work on cars, you're going to work on the car.
I think I'd learned that by now.
Really appreciate this hand.
No problem, dude.
Free labor.
I'm happy to help. I told you that. Especially, like I said, I don't mind nearly as much working on new stuff. Not because it's new, but because it's not salty and, you know, seized up.
All right, now for the sway bar end links. Once you have the sway bar end links torqued down to spec, then the next step is to start plugging these brackets back in. Electronics on the driver's side and then the passenger side. The passenger side is a little bit trickier. Got to make sure that you reroute it per the diagram so you have ample amounts of play in there. Make sure you do it right. After you let your car rest, after you set it back on the ground, put the tires back on it, don't forget to come back and torque these down to spec. Your lower control arms, front and rear, and your upper control arms, front or rear and front. Make sure you get those back to spec after it's settled down so the bushings don't get bound up in here. You don't want those bushings to bound up. They will prematurely wear out. And last but not least, for the front end, let's make sure we put these heat shields back on the upper control arms. And then the front will be done and we'll move on to the back. All right, guys, so we flipped the Jeep around. We got it up in the air on the back and got the tires off. Now we're gonna be breaking the upper and lower control arm bolts loose so the bushings don't bind. And then we'll be dropping the brackets and taking the sway bar end links off, swapping out the shock, swapping out the springs. All right, so once we get the sway bar end links out, next we drop the old, well, they're not really old, but drop the Rubicon struts out the back. So once your struts are off, you gotta pull this stay out to give this cable more free room because of the lift. And then you wanna unplug it from the diff as well. So you've got to pull that clip out right there to give it more room and then disconnect it from the differential right here. So next up, you lower the diff down and the springs will pop right out. You just pull them right down and out. Here we have the stock Rubicon spring next to the 2-inch lift Mopar. So you can see the difference in the height and the coils. Time to put the Mopar back in. When you put the spring back in, you want to make sure you situate the top perch using the guide point, and then you pop these suckers right back in there. Next up, we're gonna put these bump stop extenders in. So to get the bump stops on, you're gonna need a couple wrenches to do this. Ratcheting wrenches really come in handy. As you can see, there's not much clearance in here to get at those bolts. So now we're putting in the rear shocks. Jack the suspension back up with the floor jack so we can torque these to the 80 foot-pounds. Next up, sway bar end links. Snug them down and then torque them to spec. So once you got that sway bar end link, then you reattach the bracket on the top, which we got that on there, and then we'll reattach the plug here for the locker. Now we're gonna get the wheels back on and set it back down on its own weight, and then we'll have at those upper and lower control arms to torque those down to spec. We set it on the ground, we bounced it around a bit, and now we're gonna torque down these lower and upper control arm bolts to spec. We're back again with the Rubicon. We've taken it out for a few drives and went over some bumps and got everything to settle down. So let's go ahead and take a final measurement of the distance on the tire here. We've gone from 39.5, well, almost 39 to about 41.5. So that's roughly about 2.5 gain we got from this kit on the front wheels. We'll go to the back wheel here. Try to keep it center line to the same point. We went up to almost 42 inches. Just to give you an idea of what this gain is from the Mopar 2-inch lift. Well, that wraps it up, guys. So thanks for joining us today. Looks like we got about 2.5 inches out of this 2-inch lift from Mopar. It was real easy to put on. The instructions were pretty intuitive. Nice check for things. The one thing they're missing in the instructions is to retorque down your lower and upper control arms in the rear of the vehicle, but you should know to do that anyway. But after driving it, it drives a little bit better than stock. Everybody's right. You get 2.5 inches instead of 2, which is nice. The wheels don't look bad, even on these stock wheels, but there's plenty of room, as you can tell, to go ahead and put a bigger tire on there. So we'll probably be putting a bigger tire on there next. But if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe down below. Any questions or comments, please hit us up in the comments and let us know. Love to answer your guys' feedback. But thanks for watching us today. Appreciate it.